Welcome to Frequencies in Detritus, New Frontier for Generative Art. My name is Kenneth Millington. I'm a part-time assistant professor at Parsons New School in New York City. I am also an artist. I work primarily in painting, video, some sculpture and installation. My work is informed by science, technology, landscape, and information, and how all those can combine to make interesting projects. Of late, I've been working with television static, or rather the electromagnetic spectrum, the radio waves, and how we can use that as a resource and a medium to make art, specifically with generative art, using a randomized outcome to actually create the work from this information. So what is this ambient information and how do we visualize or experience this? For me, it came from the old television sets, the one with the antennas, CRTs. I remember those interruptions during trying to tune the channel and the hiss and the roar of the sound followed by the scribbling lights and dark shapes. That is the disruption that this ambient information is impacting on the antenna. And I thought that was really interesting, that this old technology was actually capturing something that happens as a normal phenomena out in nature. But it also our technology gives off these signals that it actually captures as well. So I thought maybe to repurpose this, right? Media archaeology, repurpose this and maybe reconsider them as a way to actually look at this rather than looking at narrative episodes. So I hunted around and found an old TV and a marine deep cycle battery so I could power it as I went out into the field. And I started to catalog different places, forests, ravines, seashore, downtown, wherever I could to kind of capture patterns of static. As you can see a few displayed here, you can see different patterns amongst the RGB striping that is there. So it became a chance to collect samples and begin to see differences from different places. And I'll show you a little video here of one of them. So with my recordings, I start to see differences, different sort of patterning, different sort of shape. And I start to wonder, why are they different in different places? So maybe the information coming in the signal has something to do with that. So I do some research and I see that it's largely derived from lightning, local weather, and a lot of man-made elements, technology and signal leakage. And a portion of it is even the cosmic microwave background radiation, the CMB. That's the Big Bang that started the whole universe. Even that's there. So this combination might be specific to place, much the way a natural landscape is geology and flora and fauna. And if it's a city context, it's culture, industry, and architecture. All those things make a place specific. Maybe this signature is equally distinct. So I thought to investigate this further, and I chose painting as a way to dialogue with the work and analyze it. So I extracted one image from the sequence and blew it up to look at it more closely. So I thought through this painted reproduction process, I can look a little bit more closely. So I start to see the technology that is there, the RGB striping, the vertical stripes, and the lights and dark shadows that play across there. And I'm immediately taken with the idea that the technology is informing my perception, my comprehension of this information. And I think that's been a very interesting discovery. I think about the optical mixing of color at this scale, right? When it's really small, we just notice the black and white shapes, but when it's zoomed in, you actually still see that it's color that is being turned on and off. And in this case, a heavy visual vibration when it's this large. Between these two paintings, Black Entropy and Negative Mirror, you can see some differences in patterns. That caused me to think a little bit about this technology that's influencing me. So I look into this and I find out a cathode ray tube television is a very unique technology. It is a vacuum tube that has, the antenna brings the information down to a small gun that shoots an electron at the back of the screen, which is coated in phosphors. They temporarily glow when the electron hits it. So we get this image start to happen in normal TV when it's very organized. When the information coming in is not organized, you get irregular patterning. An active and inactive phosphors, on, off, on, off. So I thought to explore this further in paintings. So I do this with zooming in on some smaller images, blowing them up, trying to see the vibration, what happens there, trying to see differences in shapes between all these. And I think through the painting, it slows me down enough to kind of study them and ask questions a little bit more. And I think that that's an important process and part of the research for this. So from this point of stills and a sequence, I thought to think about the space a little bit more. How does the sequence play out in a space? I thought that'd be an interesting approach to looking at this issue, turning it around a tiny bit. So I did a large-scale painting, a billboard in the Bronx, New York, hand-painted image of static that was then placed on top of a building for people to kind of consider and contemplate. This idea of a disregarded information that's around us all the time is now made visible and there. And I thought the frozen moment will be interesting contrast to the speed of life kind of around it, which this kind of demonstrates, that inversion, right? This idea of taking a problem and turning it around, seeing what we can come up with. And I thought this leads me to the main point, which is I'm getting at this point of place and index and electromagnetic information as being a signature there, an identifier. And I want to explore that. How does that move in through a natural space? So I turn to drawing and I start to think about this from above. Maybe it's a little bit like, does it function like weather? Is it like a weather map? I've seen a lot of those on TV. These fields of information kind of move in. Does electromagnetic dispersal patterns work like that? In the natural environment? Are there areas that are more concentrated than areas that are less concentrated? Do we see densities and sparseness in this information set? I thought this would be interesting to look at in the urban context as well, thinking about the grid of the cities and the blocks. Are there areas where there's going to be heavier technology usage and more density of electromagnetic information, and areas that are less so? Would this phenomena then be an interesting way to describe the place as well as the other elements that we associate with place? And I think that the drawing allowed me to see that a little bit more clearly. And then it brought me to this concept of I don't need to be bound by technology, since in the CRT televisions it informed my perception of this information. I can actually turn that around. So I turned to generative art, this idea of using computers and programs with random information put in, creating an output that is singular, unique, and random. Take my hand out of it a little bit. I thought also to investigate the antenna as a sculptural form. Rather than being beholden to the original technology of the CRT, I could explore these forms. And while there's limitations, it does have to function, there's certain forms that can be explored here. And I had to learn that wire has to be conductive in order to capture these wavelengths. There has to be a relationship between the length of the wire and the length of the wavelength that you're capturing. That leads me to learn about the electromagnetic spectrum. And while we're familiar with a portion of that, right, the visible range, I'm working with radio and microwave range. And that is where we're finding a lot of technology from human development is largely in that range. And I think that using my own antenna, I can start to control this information a little bit more. So I start to explore different prototypes and find ways to capture this cast-off signal. Right? It's not really a pollution, it's just a detritus of sorts, right? It's this field of detritus around us, all these different wavelengths coming from different directions at us. And I thought that this disregarded information could make interesting art. So I took my antennas and I started to link them up with an animation. I had an amazing grad student help me program this, Sean Scanlon, and we used open frameworks to take the information that comes in off the antenna to make a visualization of that. So we start to see a new description of what this information could be. And I wanted it to feel a little bit more organic, less rigid and rectilinear like the vertical striping, but maybe something that is a little bit more terrain-like, sort of, in an abstract sort of concept. So with these portable antennas and the animation, I have a lot of material. And I start to think about that. A portable antenna means it's a certain shape, right? It needs to be able to be carried around and sample in different locations. But that means it's taking discrete information at different moments in time versus what happens if it's more permanent and it gives us a longer view of one particular place does that let us understand its specificity a little bit better? So I start to think about what this antenna would look like, and it gets me into sculpture a little bit. So I drew a little bit of inspiration from Seneca Lake, where I walk a lot. I grew up there, and thinking about the form and the water there, and obviously I'm seeing waves, and I'm thinking about radio waves. There's a correlation there. While not the same, radio waves don't need to be transmitted through a medium, and water is the medium for the waves on its surface. I think there's something similar about how impressionable the surface is. Water is affected by gravity, temperature, wind. This antenna with the animation are impressionable from this electromagnetic information that it comes down. And I thought that would be an interesting play between those. I also thought the animation I wanted to create is a undulating terrain, which again maybe mimics a little bit of this surface of water. So I think there's a relationship there. You're seeing a plywood sculpture, 4 by 4 feet, and a lot of copper wire that runs through there as the conductive element. And from this, we're able to then hook it up to the computer and run open frameworks to let this ambient native information be transcribed. It is now coming in as chaotic information to the program, and it is turning it out as an animation. In this case, a terrain that undulates, we see altitudes, peaks, and valleys as it kind of evolves and emerges. And it reminds me a little bit of that water surface, right? And we're seeing a chance to put information into a different perceptual state. Can we give you information and let you think about it differently? We've seen it already as static on the TV screen with vertical lines, but maybe now we're seeing it in a different way. And maybe we'll try and get us to think about it as a space or something that we move through since these waves are around us all the time. The idea that it's a landscape and a space in the animation may reinforce that a little bit. So it is now a real-time functioning antenna that plays immediately what comes in through the conductive material, through the program, and then is projected out simultaneously. So it's a very complex piece in and of itself. I'll show you a little bit of the animation running real-time right here. Thank you for joining this presentation and for reconsidering information, place, and art. Please visit my website, www.kenmillington.com, or follow me on Instagram, Kenneth Millington. I would like to give a special thanks to Sean Scanlon, the project coder, Connections, Exploring Heritage, Architecture, Cities, Art, Media, AMPS, Architecture, Media, Politics, Society, University of Kent, Canterbury. Thank you very much.